Asaf.
How are you,
Hi.
Lisa?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Hey,
Hi, Nate.
hey, how's it going?
Good. Trying to figure out Bancor V2.1. Having a lot of questions. So definitely need you guys to help me. So let me explain. Let me explain how I think the system works, and then you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. So
Okay.
the difference. So right now there's a pool as usual. It's a liquidity pool, and people can put in tokens. So like any random token like TKN, and then every time a liquidity provider adds token into the system, into the pool, then the network itself will be contributing the equivalent value of BNT into the system. So that's how pools are created, which is very different from like Uniswap, where you have to put both sides into the system. Now you just have to put one side, and the protocol will automatically put the same amount. And if you remove any of the liquidity or remove the token that you're creating, that you put in, then these BNT will be burnt. So the protocol will either mint or burnt based on the demand of liquidity inside. Okay,
Correct.
so that I get. And then in Bancor, there is this ownership. You get a different token to represent the ownership of your ownership in the liquidity pool. And that means you get to have both. When you put the tokens in, or when you get the liquidity pool token, you only get access to the TKN token, right? Not the BNT token.
What do you mean?
So if I have 100 in a liquidity pool, there's 100 TKN token and 100 BNT token. And if I supply 10% of that, then I actually added 10 TKN tokens into the pool. So my liquidity pool token means that I get access to 10% of this the assets in this pool. But
Yep.
I will not own anything from the BNT side. I'm only owning any assets from the TKN side because that's the only thing that I'm supplying.
Correct. And you will just collect your fees in TKN. So roughly 50% of the fees will collect on the TKN side, and you'll collect 10% of those fees.
Yeah, and the fees are paid in both TKN and BNT.
So if you are a TKN liquidity provider, you'll just receive the fees in TKN. If you're a BNT liquidity provider, you'll just receive the fees in BNT.
Yeah, and as a user who use Bancor, I have the transaction fees are paid in TKN and in BNT.
Correct. So with the conversion, the two tokens, so say I'm converting TKN to BNT, then the fees will collect on the BNT side. So they'll always land in the two token. And then just like any regular AMM, there's a arbitrage conversion that happens in the opposite direction to balance the prices. And so then a reverse trade in roughly the same amount will occur, and the fees will then go from BNT to, the conversion will be BNT to TKN. So the fees will land on the TKN side. So it usually ends up to about 50% of each conversion. The fees end up on either side, just like a regular pool. Just in this case, the BNT provider collects the BNT fee, and the TKN liquidity provider collects the TKN fee. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense. So now, because there are fees being collected, so the protocol token pools are now worth. So step 5 is that the pool is now worth 110 BNT, because the 10 extra BNT comes from the fees that we mentioned through the different trade, correct?
So you're looking at the blog post, I assume, and
yes.
You said you're on step 5. Right, so in step 5, so some volume goes through the pool, and let's say the TKN liquidity provider has collected 10, or the collected fees that make their pool tokens equal to 110 TKN. And now the protocol, assuming that the protocol is still providing all of the liquidity on the BNT side, the protocol's pool tokens are now worth 110 BNT.
So it's worth 110 BNT. So when it says it's worth 110 BNT due to fees, that means people traded and the fees are accumulated in BNT. So the extra BNT goes into the system, and that means there's almost equivalent of 110 protocol tokens, 110 TKN tokens inside that. It doesn't work like that, right?
Yeah, it could. If let's say that amount of fees generated this amount of volume, then I guess, Asaf, is it correct that, let's say, some amount of volume, the pool started with 100 BNT on one side and 100 TKN on the other side, and an amount of fees generated enough, an amount of volume generated enough fees such that the BNT side's pool tokens are worth now 110 BNT. Would we assume then that the TKN pool tokens would be worth the same value if roughly 50% of the fees are getting dropped on both sides?
Yeah, that's a valid assumption. Basically, we see distribution in both ends, and the protection mechanism is enabling exposure to a single token alongside holding or maintaining your position. So the original stake. So we negate any or mitigate any impermanent loss that might occur as a result of that.
So without
Yeah, go on, sorry.
So without anyone introducing new liquidity into the pool itself can just increase the pool size just because there's trade available.
Well, that's just like any AMM pool. As fees accrue within a pool, the pool tokens end up being worth more. The fees accrue in the value of pool tokens. So that's no different than any existing AMM pool.
Okay.
Is that?
Yes. So, okay. Yeah, I just want to be sure that this 110 BNT is not because that 10 extra BNT is generated by the protocol, because the TKN side is worth.
So let's maybe go through this process one more time.
Yes.
Let's say there is like 100 TKN and 100 BNT in the pool at the moment. Okay. If you come in and you want to stake TKN, and you want to stake 10 TKN, the protocol would mint 10 BNT as a result of that, generating X amount of pool tokens as a result of adding 10 TKN and 10 BNT. And I'm keeping 10 and 10 simply because it was 100 and 100, so the ratio between TKN and BNT is the same. So let's assume as well that the amount of pool tokens that were minted as a result of adding liquidity is 20. 10 out of this, 50% is allocated for your position, and 10 pool tokens are allocated for the protocol until someone decides to stake BNT into the protocol.
Wait, 10 tokens are allocated to the protocol until someone decides to stake BNT.
So wait, before we get kind of lost on what happens when a user comes in and stakes BNT, I just want to make sure we're clear on this dynamic and this. Asaf, I'll share the example Lisa's looking at, but I just want to make sure we're clear on the dynamic that when a pool processes fees, just like any AMM pool, 50% of the fees go to one side and 50% of the fees go to another side. And it increases the value of the pool tokens. And the difference is with most pools, it's increasing the value of one pool token, whereas with these pools, there are 2 pool tokens for each pool, right? There's the pool tokens that exist on the BNT side, and they're the pool tokens that exist on the token side. And so when fees accrue on either side, and they typically get distributed on both sides, that increases the value of both pool tokens. Is that clear?
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay, cool. So Asaf, do you want to run back into kind of what you were explaining when you were talking about adding additional liquidity to a pool?
Yeah. So basically, if you stake TKN the protocol mints BNT to represent the same value, and that will be added into the pool.
Yeah, which is step 6, right? Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about adding additional?
No. So step 1 is your deposit of TKN. So your stake into TKN. Step 2 is basically the protocol matching that deposit, creating pool tokens as a result of both sides being added as a liquidity. Step 3 indicates that half of the pool tokens are allocated for your staked position, and the other half is basically held by the protocol for different reasons, which we'll get to them in a second. Okay? And this kind of circle back to what you've asked. Your pool token position, it's exposed to TKN, but you are basically it's holding pool tokens. So if you decide to unstake and unprotect your position, you'll basically, and I'm not getting into like the different scenarios for a second, but if there, let's say there are no available pool tokens other than what you're holding, your position and your liquidation amount will be the TKN value plus the BNT side of the pool token worth, plus any needed BNT in order to cover any impermanent loss that you encounter.
Asaf, it feels like we haven't gotten clear on the liquidity provision, so adding liquidity part. So I don't want to skip ahead to the withdrawing liquidity part.
I'm just Lisa was mentioning something that was not 100% accurate, so I was pointing it out. But we can circle back to it at the end of the process.
Okay.
So step 3, pool tokens are being issued or being minted to represent both the 100 TKN and 100 BNT that were staked into liquidity. Half of which are associated with your position, half are held by the protocol. Step 4, just indication of volume that generate fees and leave behind the fees in the pool. Then we get to step 5, which represent the value accumulation based on fees. And now the pool tokens that the protocol holds are actually worth more than what they initially were. If an outside LP now comes in and stake BNT into the pool, is basically replacing, or the pool tokens that are being held by the protocol are being replaced and are moved into the LP position.
Okay. That helps to. Okay, that explains some stuff.
Okay, so think about step 2 and step 6.
Yeah.
Step 2 is like the protocol minting BNTs on a given moment. And step 6 is now that some user is staking these like external quote unquote BNTs into the pool, we burn these extra BNTs because they represent the BNTs were minted on step 2.
Okay. Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Yes.
Okay, so that kind of explained again on point 7.
Yeah.
Is really like the fact that, on step 2 we mint as a placeholder BNTs, and then when someone stake the BNTs, we burn them again.
So we're actually burning extra 10.
Exactly, we actually burn extra 10 because the extra 10 were generated in fees.
So I think it's really key to think of when the protocol provides the opposite side in BNT. It's sort of like a co-investment in that the protocol can actually earn money through fees on the BNT that they've provided. And that's essentially what we're showing in this example, is that in between the time the protocol provided the BNT and another liquidity provider came in to replace that protocol provided BNT, the protocol BNT generated fees that were then burnt as this excess BNT once this other LP came in and replaced the protocol BNT.
So by this logic, what the protocol is doing, it's almost like a share buyback mechanism every time a profit is being generated. And following this logic, why would you allow other people to be staking BNT instead when the protocol staking BNT actually adds more value to all the BNT holders in the system?
Well, I guess a key part of the system is that there are existing BNT holders who would also like to generate yield on their BNT. And if the protocol is just continuously minting and always covering the other side, then this could create significantly more, I guess, inflation or new BNT supply that we would actually want to see.
It also creates like or eliminates the price pressure on BNT to some degree. If it's only minted to, if it's only used to by the protocol to mint and burn against tokens, there's no real market price for BNT anymore, and it will not be able to provide the protection as it is expected, which is one of the issues that Andrew actually pointed out in his solution, that if there's like only single side and he's minting or creating this token to represent the any common, like the common denominator in the ecosystem, there's a risk of that token not to have any real value, and then not to really be able to serve as a good mechanism to support the ecosystem. What we're doing here is we use the BNT that exists in circulation, and we give it the opportunity to reduce the mint amount, overall inflation, and benefit for BNT holders to be part of this ecosystem and participate in the game.
Okay, that makes sense. Then, yeah, so to summarize, that is to have all the existing BNT holders to come in helps to reduce the volatility in the value of BNT. That's one. And second is to almost create market demand or market price for BNT. Correct?
Well, it's not to reduce the volatility, it's reduce the
because price pressure is volatility.
Excuse me?
The price pressure adds volatility to the value of BNT. And by having existing BNT holders to come in to be providing liquidity, then you are reducing this price pressure, which helps to reduce volatility in the long run of the BNT token.
In a way, it makes sense. Yeah, in a way, it makes sense. The goal behind it is really to bring all BNT into the place we see best fit for BNT, which is within the protocol serving the as a liquidity intermediate token.
Okay, makes sense. Okay, so I think. Okay, so I think that helps. Okay, that helps with the pool side of things before we go into the insurance side of things. How do you define the implied TKN price? Because the amount of BNT is related to the implied TKN price. And number one, BNT value changes based on the different pools that it's being involved in. Number two, TKN price could be different in all the different exchanges outside. So how do you define the implied TKN price to determine the amount of BNT to add in?
Asaf.
Okay, yeah.
So
we have two prices. Well, first of all, we use the pool as the oracle in a sense.
Yeah.
We've identified that AMM pools in their 50-50 design is the best and most active oracle that always kind of, there's a good side and a bad side, but the good side is it's always like matching the market price. There's no opportunity left behind, and AMMs are really like good in that sense. So we wanted to use the pool as an oracle for the minting of BNT, but there is a risk with that. The risk is that it's abusive.
Okay, one second before you talk about the risk. Isn't the point of V2 about changing this 50-50 ratio? So because you take the price of this TKN price from oracles to get the external price, and so your balance will not always be 50-50. Isn't that the V2 difference from V1 Bancor V1 and Bancor V2? The main difference is that it's not always 50-50 in V2.
So yeah, this has been a pretty clear break from the original V2 model that we were using. I would say that the V2.1 is actually way closer to V1. It's actually using V1 pools, except there's a whitelist that allows you to add single asset exposure and impermanent loss protection. We actually found that dynamic weights is not, and I guess rewind the clock, we were really the first project to start talking about dynamic weights, right? Like you had Balancer a little bit that was messing around with different, exposure. This is something that you could do with Bancor, but it was fixed. And we came along and said, hey, why not try dynamic weights that respond to external oracle prices, specific chain link. And I think since we've started experimenting with that, we've seen a number of projects follow along in that experimentation, from Dodo to Cofix is another one, to even Balancer is now starting to play with dynamic weights. We found, after really pushing the model out live, that there was a pretty significant issue in times of high volatility with the way the oracles are updating the pool, and that arbitrageurs were really always going to be faster than oracle updates, no matter your oracle. Now we're researching the possibility of this model of dynamic weights and oracle-based AMMs working on an L2 ecosystem, where the threat of arbitrageurs moving faster than the oracle updates, where it's less of a threat. But on L1, we really decided that this was an insurmountable issue with arbitrageurs. Effectively, some would call it front running the oracles. It's not in a purposely abusive thing, but arbitrageurs are just so fast, they're going to update the pool before. So what this ends up leading to is, during periods of high volatility, LPs can actually suffer more impermanent loss than in just a regular non-oracle based AMM. So we should definitely get it clear up front that V2.1 is no longer using dynamic weights. It's using 50-50 weights that are fixed in the pools. And it's no longer using an external oracle.
Okay.
So those are two very clear breaks we've made with the original V2 design. And V2.1 is it's sort of a tough name because it implies that we're still using that, but we had to make some pretty drastic changes to the way these pools function. We think we ended up with something that really does deliver for LPs, no risk of impermanent.
Okay, got it. Then that makes sense.
We think a lot of these other projects that are sort of followed in our path of using Oracle-based AMMs, you're already seeing, I don't know if you've been following with Dodo, but during times of volatility, LPs can lose quite a lot of money. And our key was really to make this a set it and forget it solution, where even during periods of volatility, you're not subject to that. So does that answer your question about dynamic weights?
Yeah, that answers a lot, because then what Asaf said about the pool as an oracle, that will make a lot more sense. Then you get the implied price of the TKN because that's already fixed as a 50-50. Initially, I thought that's how you start the pool with 50-50, then you use dynamic weights, and then the BNT will always be burnt and minted based on the dynamic weights and whatever Oracle is saying. Okay, got it.
So slightly different approach here. And what I've started saying is we use it's not really an average, but we check against something else. So as I said, we use the pool price as the oracle to mint the BNT amount. But because it has risk of flash loans and abusive behavior, we also maintain a simple moving average of the last 10 minutes. So in order for you to successfully stake TKN single-sided into the pool, we check against that simple moving average. And if the deviation is greater than 1%, or depends, it's like 1% or 2%, if there is a significant deviation, then we prevent you from staking at that given moment until the pool balances out. So there is some kind of a risk mitigation process in place to prevent any type of abuse on this type of activity.
Before we go on to insurance, what will be the impact on the constant inflation and deflation of BNT supply? What is the impact on the price of BNT, considering that there's a constant inflation and deflation of BNT supply?
So the key sort of economic assumption that that we're making with this new model is that fees generated from the protocol co-investments, right? The protocol investing the other side, those are going to generate more revenue than the cost of liquidity protection. So the minting BNT to act as a co-investment, that type of minting, we've in our studies, and this is noted in the economic report too, it doesn't really end up flowing outside of the pools. Only in instances of arbitrage does this new BNT supply actually have an external sort of market effect on the price of BNT. So you can think of the sort of two key types of minting. One is to co-invest, and this is a sort of price neutral event.
Yep.
And then the second, which we can get into, is the impermanent loss insurance payouts. So when an LP, whether it's a TKN LP or a BNT LP, withdraws their liquidity and has suffered impermanent loss, the protocol pays out based on the amount of impermanent loss they have suffered. And so the idea is that you have this existing sort of balance of BNT, and you have the sort of, and so BNT is being burned as the protocol is generating fees off of its co-investments, and it is being minted to pay out. And this is a sort of, I guess, price negative or inflation based event when you pay out for the impermanent loss insurance. And the idea is that fees will be greater than the amount of insurance you're paying out. So the fees are like the revenue, and the impermanent loss protection is sort of the cost of doing business. And just like any business, we will need to fine tune the parameters and ensure that the system is generating more revenue than its costs. So does that make sense?
Yeah. So the implied the impermanent loss insurance is paid in BNT, correct?
So if there is no available TKN in order to pay out the insurance, then it would be paid in BNT, and it's paid such that the liquidity provider will always receive the same value of the tokens that they initially staked. So let's say they staked 100 TKN, and the TKN price is $1 at the time, so it was $100 worth of TKN. The TKN price doubles to $200, and the TKN liquidity provider has accrued full impermanent loss protection, so is able to withdraw like the same principal value. That means that a portion of that $200 will be paid out in TKN, and if there's not enough TKN available from the burnt pool tokens, then part of that $200 will be paid out in BNT.
So where's this available TKN pool coming from? All the TKN that is in the pool is either via fees, which goes to the liquidity provider, or people who are providing the liquidity, the principal in the first place. So where's the extra ones coming from for insurance purposes?
Sure. So Asaf, maybe you can explain how the excess TKN becomes available when it's my understanding that when there are price movements, for instance, just like regular sort of impermanent loss and shifting exposures, when the TKN price drops relative to BNT, that the pool is buying the dropping asset. So in that case, the pool would be buying TKN and have excess TKN that could be used to pay out the impermanent loss insurance. Is that accurate, Asaf?
Let's go over, yes, but let's go over like different scenarios and explain, because there are like several different ways of getting into this like end result, which might slightly be different for each one. So
sorry to go, but let's definitely make sure that some of those scenarios include instances in which there would be excess TKN that can be used to pay for impermanent loss on the TKN side.
Yeah, fine. And if I miss anything, you can add them as well.
Okay.
So imagine a situation where you start off by staking the BNT side, okay? So let's say you stake BNT. You receive the pool tokens. For your position, and these pool tokens, they actually represent both TKN reserve and BNT reserve. When you remove when you unstake your position, your protected position, basically that's the easiest way for the protocol to handle. What happens is the equivalent of your position is being minted in BNTs, and these pool tokens that were allocated for your position are now held by the protocol. Okay?
Sorry, can you repeat that part again?
Of course. So let's say you stake 100 BNT into the protocol or into protection. X amount of pool tokens are being allocated for your position. Even though these pool tokens represent both TKN and BNT behind the scenes, when you unstake your protected position, what the protocol does is basically mints the equivalent amount of BNT, so the worth of BNT, gives you that BNT amount, and take possession of the pool tokens that were allocated to your original stake.
Okay.
So in that sense, when you unstake a BNT position, you always receive the full amount in BNT.
The full amount you put in, plus any fees incurred during that period.
Exactly, given the protection level that you had. So we assume 100% protection. So yes, you'll get your original stake plus the fees that are being accumulated in the pool.
Okay.
If you come with TKN, there are multiple different scenarios, which is slightly more elaborate, but let's dive in and see if that makes sense. So again, if I come with the TKN as the example show, I come with 100 TKN. BNT are being minted against that. I receive half of the minted pool tokens. And these the half amount of pool tokens are allocated for my TKN position. Now, when I want to liquidate or when I want to unstake my protected position on TKN, few different things happen. So the first thing that happens is we check the protocol checks and part of the process if there are any additional pool tokens that are being held by the protocol that are available. If there are any additional pool tokens that are being held by the protocol at that given moment, the calculation takes them into consideration in the attempt of providing you your full protected amount in TKN. So what this basically means is that not only your pool tokens are being liquidated at that given moment in time, but any available pool token that exists in the protocol hands are being liquidated at the same time. You receive your portion in TKN, and the BNT side is being burnt against that.
And this is because the protocol is the one contributing the BNT. That's how they have ownership of these pool tokens as well.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Got it.
Okay, so in that specific scenario, I gave you a situation where the pool tokens that you are trying, or your position when you try to liquidate it or unstake it, there are different variations in it. So the first variation is that the protocol doesn't need to hold any pool tokens because your position, because of price movements and changes, has more TKN than what it's owning you originally. Let's say TKN price was cut by half. So more TKN were added into the pool. So now your pool token, and again, remember this, it's very important. We guarantee you to receive the same amount of TKN plus fees. Okay. So if you come in with 100 TKN, and now TKN price is cut by half, making the ratio different in the pool, your pool tokens actually might be worth more TKN than what you come in with. So when we unstake your pool token or when we liquidate your pool tokens, that would give sufficient TKN to cover your protected position.
Okay, we have to repeat that a bit again. So when the value of TKN reduces, wouldn't arbitrageurs come in to equalize the value of whatever that's in the pool versus whatever that's outside?
Yeah, exactly. And as a result of that, more TKN will exist in the pool.
Okay.
So the amount of TKN per pool token will be greater. And that leads into having, when you liquidate the pool tokens, you're receiving more TKNs as a result of that.
Yeah, but the value is still the same because the value of each TKN reduces. So the entire total value of the TKN quantity times the value of each is the same. It's the same still, right?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, sorry, I was cutting you off. So the value in return will. So at the end of the day, the insurance is not to guarantee the amount of TKN tokens that you put in.
It's not the guarantee of the value. No, it's not the guarantee of the value. It's the guarantee of the amount.
So that okay.
Think about again the concept behind it is stake and stay long on your token, which means that if you come with 100 TKN, you'll basically be long on these 100 TKN. If the TKN price goes up, you're still winning. If the price goes down, you'll still receive these 100 TKNs. Like this is what you wanted. This is what you signed up for, and it's a good thing because it allows you to be able to maintain that long position that you were looking for.
Okay, got it.
So I would just focus on the token amount, not necessarily the price.
Yeah, that's exactly what we said. Like the amount is what we are protecting you for. This is the single token exposure we're discussing. So So in any given situation, when you unstake your TKN position, the protocol checks if there is any availability of pool tokens that can give you sufficient TKN to cover that protected position, and basically tries to give you as much of your position in TKN. Now, in a given situation, you might receive everything in TKN because there are a lot of TKNs in the pool, and the pool tokens that you've provided are rich in TKN, quote unquote. And therefore, you'll receive that TKN in full, and the BNT that were allocated for the stake position will be burned. In other cases, there might be some kind of a distribution between TKN and BNT amounts. And what does that mean? It means that, let's say, in a given situation, TKN is going up in price, and now there's less TKN to cover your stake position. You'll receive as much as possible in TKN, and the protocol will calculate the amount that is missing. So let's say your stake position is 100 TKN, and let's assume 10 TKN were collected as fees. So you need to receive 110 TKN back when you try to unprotect your position. The available TKN given the scenario are 70, which means 40 TKNs are missing to give you back. What the protocol does is calculate the worth of 40 TKNs in BNT, mints that BNT, or if needed, mints that BNTs, and transfer them to you as well. So what you receive at the end is the worth of 110 TKNs, which was your protected position.
Okay. So there are two things here. The first one is the risk of BNT price change. So by the time you get this 40 TKN, this missing 40 TKN in the value of BNT, that could change. So that is a risk. And the other one is that for, let's say you're supposed to get back 110 TKN and there's a missing 40 TKN, does that mean that the pool has no more TKN available? Only BNT in that pool?
No, it doesn't mean. Well, I'll start with the second option, the second question. No, it does not mean that the pool doesn't have any TKN available in the pool. What it does mean that from the available pool tokens, either your position or the protocol position alongside with yours, this is the maximum available TKN that can be released from the pool.
Okay. And if the protocol doesn't have the pool token, how would that work?
Then only your pool tokens that are allocated into your stake position or protected position will be liquidated.
And then, so
any
then
staked position, any staked position still holds pool tokens behind the scenes. So remember, going back to the 100 and 100, going back to the original like step 1, step 2. So if you stake 100 TKN and the protocol mints 100 BNT, let's say that generates 20 pool tokens as a result. 10 pool tokens are locked with your staked position. So these 10 pool tokens are always part of your protected position. And if there are more pool tokens available on the protocol belonging, like holding, then that will be used in order to provide you the maximum amount of TKN that is available.
So in what scenario will BNT be minted? Will that only be minted when the pool, the protocol doesn't issue BNT because BNT is actually staked by someone else, and then I'm staking TKN. There isn't enough TKN in the system to be giving me my missing 40 TKN. Then the system will mint BNT to return BNT, which is the equivalent value of 40 TKN to me. Is that the situation where BNT will be minted in this scenario?
Yes. So if the available amount TKN plus BNT as a result of like liquidating the pool tokens is still below the value of what you should receive in TKN, then more BNTs will be minted. Again, let's say it again. Okay. So let's say your position of 100 TKN resulted in 10 pool tokens. It's locked together. Now you liquidate these 10 pool tokens, unstake your position. That generates 70 TKNs and 20 BNTs. That's the current value of the 10 pool tokens. Okay, assuming that's the now if the price of BNT to TKN requires to mint more BNTs in order to provide the extra 40 that are missing, then more BNTs will be minted.
So I guess my confusion is that when there isn't the available pool tokens will give you either the TKN SS to TKN or SS to BNT. And given that it's a 50-50, it's a equal dynamics of weight, then why would there be a difference in the amount of tokens available? Because arbitrageurs will always come in to equalize the amount inside. Like, why would there be a missing amount of tokens on either the BNT side or the TKN side?
Because, well, sometimes it happens. First of all, you need to remember that if you come in with 100 TKN, you receive half the pool tokens, and that half pool tokens represent TKN and BNT. So in a way, it represents 50 TKN and 50 BNTs. And then when you remove your liquidity, you'll start off with that point. From that point on.
So I provide 100 TKN, but the insurance covers 100 TKN, not 50 TKN, 50 BNT, right?
Yeah, it covers you with 100 TKN, but the underlying assets that are available are 50 TKN and 50 BNT. And then from that point, if the value of 100 TKN or the value of 110 based on the fees and accumulations whatsoever, if the underlying value of the TKN and BNT is less than the 110 TKN that are entitled for your stake position, then more BNTs will be minted.
Okay, got it.
And the way, again, the way we foresee it, and this is what we've done with the financial analyst that we've worked with, is that on exit, if you reach full protection, given the randomness of your position. So if you have a TKN, it's a bet on TKN, and if someone comes in and take a long position on BNT, it's always like there's a diversity in positions. The actual amount of BNTs that are being minted at the end of the process is fairly conservative overall, due to what we've discussed, like the reasoning behind it. The fact that you have the pool tokens, the underlying assets have a worth that is relatively close to your original stake. It might be above, it might be below. If it's below, we mint. If it's below, we mint BNTs. If it's above, we actually burn BNTs and give you the worth of your protected position.
If both sides, if BNT and TKN are staked by different people, where will the burning of BNT come from? Or will there even be a scenario where you have to burn BNT?
So burning BNT is only happening on TKN, on removing liquidity or unstaking TKN side.
But also, what about when the protocol's BNT is replaced?
Well, yeah, that's on a add liquidity. It happens. The burning happens when someone adds BNT. So we burn what was minted by the protocol. But when you remove liquidity, there's only one scenario which has a potential of burning BNTs, which is removing TKN.
Yeah.
Or
So
removing TKN position.
So the two instances of burning is when you're removing TKN position, and there are excess BNT in order to cover the TKN position. That's one instance. The second is when there are protocol BNT co-invested in the pool, and a user comes along and replaces that BNT. It then burns the protocol provided BNT along with any fees that have been generated.
So when I'm unstaking TKN, and the pool, the BNT that's in the pool is staked by someone else, and when I unstake TKN, I unstake my position, and BNT needs to be burnt, where is the burning of where is the supply coming from?
What do you mean?
So
okay. So the basically the supply came in from either the user or well, actually it came in from the protocol initial minting.
No, so yes, that is at first, but someone else comes in to be providing to stake BNT instead. So the protocol minted BNT is already burnt.
Yeah.
And now
and when you unstake your position, there is a possibility of burning additional BNTs because if there is an excess of BNT to cover your protected position, they will also be burnt. So even if they were brought in by the user, they will also be burned. The same way as Nate mentioned, fees that are accumulated on the BNT side, if they're not being used to cover your protected position, they would also be burned.
But this BNT
Not only that we mint BNT, we also have mechanism to burn BNTs, and this burning mechanism can actually access the amount of minting at given moments.
Okay, agree. And so you're saying that if there's excess BNT because of trading and everything, then it will be given to me who's unstaking TKN tokens. Now my question is that this excess BNT that is generated, wouldn't that go back to these users who are staking BNT in the first place? Why would these liquidity providers of BNT would be willing to give up their additional excess of BNT token so that it'll be burned, it'll be given to me who's unstaking TKN?
Because they get a relative amount of the fees from the activity in the pool. Same as you receive the relative amount of the fees from the activity in the pool.
Yeah. So if we go back to what Nick said again, in the system you either have additional revenue, which is the transaction fees, and then the cost stream is the insurance to protect these tokens. And for the revenue stream, it's if the protocol is the one co-investing, then the protocol earns that revenue stream. If the protocol is not the one co-investing, then whoever that's staking tokens in the liquidity pool will be receiving that. The protocol doesn't have any share of this revenue stream. Correct or wrong?
If the protocol does not hold any pool tokens, then the protocol does not have any share of the fees that are being accumulated. That's correct.
Okay, so if my pool right now is TKN and BNT, both are by individual users, the protocol has no say in this, then someone wants to liquidate, someone wants to withdraw the pool token.
Okay. But your position is basically backed by pool tokens. So your fees are basically everything that the pool tokens that you hold are being collecting. Okay, so you collect activity to TKN and activity to BNT because you hold pool tokens as a backup to your staked position.
So the additional BNT token that comes in is because I own pool tokens of this pool that has TKN and BNT. And
Exactly.
but I do not have the rights to access the BNT that's created because I'm only providing the TKN.
Yeah, but you access it by
withdrawing.
But by the fact that it's being accumulated on your pool token position that is backing your staked position provides you with either it provides you with more access to more fees eventually. Like you'll get accumulated more as a result of that.
So so when I liquidate my position, because I have exposure to the BNT side as well, then I will get the TKN and BNT. Or will this BNT be burnt? So that whoever that is remaining there, they get to long it, and that is aligned with the concept that we're talking about. You want to long these tokens.
Yeah, so if you come in with TKN and you long on TKN, behind the scenes, the underlying asset is a pool token that has access to TKN and BNT.
Correct.
When you unstake, unprotect your position, you'll receive some or everything in TKN, and if not everything is available in TKN, you'll receive a matching amount of BNT to represent the missing amount of TKNs from your protected position. This amount of BNT is part of your holding as pool token as well, and it collects fees from both transactions. So TKN to BNT and BNT to TKN, like fees are being left on your position in that sense. And that provides with sufficient, or that's potentially provides sufficient amount to cover your stake position with exposure to TKN. If not, more BNTs will be minted. If there is an excess due to fees and due to growing value in the BNT side, this amount will be burned. And again, the calculation is to give you the 100 TKN plus whatever fees that are being collected in your position out of all of the activity that the pool sees. So if that ends up being, and this value is normalized into TKN. So the 10 TKN that we see is basically the activity that your pool token are exposed to, the fees that are being accumulated in the pool, and that's normalized into TKN amount. And that's the amount that you are entitled to receive as part of your unstaked position.
Why doesn't the pool just use that additional? So let's say there's a missing amount of TKN that needs to be given to this person who liquidates their position, and there is BNT available. Why doesn't the pool trade that BNT for TKN that's in the pool, so that the BNT will be given, the TKN will be given to the user, the user who liquidates, and then you burn this BNT, so it increases. So both sides, like the pool actually reduces, and both sides gone. One is by liquidation, one is by burning, and whatever BNT is in the pool will, or BNT in general, will increase in value because there are some BNT that's being burnt.
Yeah. So imagine there is like amount of TKNs and amount of BNT that are being part of your position and are supposed to go to you now. First of all, we give you 100% of the TKN side.
Yep.
And now out of the BNT side, if the protocol tries to convert that from BNT to TKN, it might create price deviation in the pool. So that's the first risk or issue that we didn't want to encounter. Like, it doesn't make sense to encounter that. Okay. Second thing is, once you convert the BNT, you create price fluctuations, and you can no longer burn these BNTs. So you create basically an arbitrage opportunity to extract this value.
Okay.
So the result of this path or scenario, we actually thought about it, by the way, but the result is basically giving free money to arbitrage, which is counterintuitive to what we want to try and create here. So the result is basically like just find this mechanism that you as a liquidity provider will maintain your long position, will be able to have access to that long position, and you receive the value worth of your staked amount plus whatever fees are being accumulated. So if your worth is now 110 TKNs instead of 100 that you came in with, you'll receive the value of 110 TKN as of the way the pool sees it today, on the moment of liquidation.
Okay. And that's the only price oracle you're relying on when you're finding out the value of TKN and the amount of BNT needed to be given to this person that's liquidating.
Yes. Yes. And again, as I said, like the oracle itself, the pool oracle itself has two different prices, and we check the deviation between them.
Okay. Got it.
Lisa, did that answer your? Do you feel clear on that? On the, I guess, with withdrawal process and how the BNT is, in which cases we would need to mint BNT to cover the impermanent loss?
Yep. So we cover three scenarios. One is what happens when you stake BNT. Second is what happens when you stake BNT. Second is what happens when you stake TKN, and BNT is minted. And in the staking BNT TKN part, and we look at two scenarios when you're unstaking. First is if there is an equivalent amount of BNT, if there's equivalent amount of TKN. Second is if there is insufficient TKN. So there's three scenarios that we covered.
Yeah.
Is that
all? On the unstake, we've covered three scenarios because we said unstake BNT side, which basically just mints the equivalent amount and transfer that to the user. And on the TKN side, there are two options. One, if the protocol has access of pool tokens and then cover, basically liquidates all of them. Everything is required to give you 100% TKN. And if the protocol doesn't have sufficient or doesn't have it all, then BNT is being minted or burned based on the amount that the value of TKN that you need to receive.
Okay.
So Asaf, I guess going back to the original question, is there a way to break down, just simplifying the instances in which there would be sufficient or excess TKN available to pay out the TKN liquidity provider?
Yeah, so either in a case where there is, if TKN price goes down, then there will be access of TKN in the pool, and the pool token position versus the amount of TKN that we that the user is entitled to would be different than they originally came in with. And then there is a chance that the pool token that they liquidate will provide sufficient amount of TKN from the get-go.
And then, go ahead, Lisa.
So it's either if there's enough TKN for the person that's liquidating the position, there's only two scenarios for that. One is because TKN price goes down, there's excess quantity of TKN, so the amount you get back will be more than the amount you put. The quantity will be more than the amount you put in, but the value will be the same. The second is that the pool has enough TKN to be giving back to you when you're liquidating.
Yeah, well, the value would be the same. It's a tough one to really answer, because if you come in with 100 TKN on day one and you unstake 100 TKN and you unstake a position, you'll still receive 100 TKN. Let's say there's no fees for a second. So you came in with 100, you'll come out with 100 TKN. If the value outside of TKN has dropped, then the value of TKN that you came in on day one might be $100, and the value of TKN you come out on day 100 might be different. It might be $70 or $60 or $50 or whatever it is. Okay. but you'll be entitled to receiving the 100 tokens worth.
100 tokens. Yeah, 100 tokens worth when you first put in. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's scenario one of getting your, when you liquidate, then you get everything back in TKN. Scenario two is that the pool has enough TKN so that when you liquidate your position, you also get back everything in TKN.
Yeah, if the pool has enough pool tokens.
Enough pool tokens, okay.
Enough pool tokens to liquidate in order to cover the amount of TKN that you're entitled to.
And why would it have enough pool tokens to cover the?
If someone stakes TKN, massive amount of TKN, and no one stakes BNT against that, and then Lisa comes in and she wants to unstake her position, then the protocol at that specific moment in time is actually holding half of whatever was staked single-sided beforehand.
Got it. Does that make sense, Lisa?
No, because if I put in a lot of TKN into the pool and nobody's matching my stake, then the protocol will be providing the BNT instead. So when you say that the protocol...
The protocol will be providing the BNT, and the protocol will be holding half of the pool tokens. And a pool token represents TKN and BNT.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Got it.
Yeah, I know it's...
So
it's a mix.
Yeah, well, no, I think I was a little misleading in the beginning. So I guess what's really key is that the protocol is holding pool tokens, and it's not just generating BNT fees, it's also generating TKN fees.
Yes, that's a big thing too. Okay.
So I think that's kind of my fault in the beginning for explaining it in a little confusing way. And those TKN fees that the protocol is generating can be used to pay out the TKN liquidity providers impermanent loss.
Yes. If there is no impermanent loss, because the opposite of impermanent, but arbitrages will make it equal. So the maximum, there's a ceiling to the price.
If there is in the one rare scenario where you come in on day 1 and you want to get out on day 100, and there is like a very rare scenario where the price of both assets is exactly as you came in with, and there's no impermanent loss by default, then only then you'll receive the exact same as if you were staking in a regular AMM. The difference here is that you have a single token exposure still. So you come in with TKN and you can leave out with TKN. Whereas on regular AMMs, you come in with both assets and you have exposure to both assets. As we've seen so far, the likelihood of such an event to happen is very, very small.
Yeah.
So in almost like majority of cases, you'll have impermanent loss. And what most AMMs are relying on is enough activity to counter that impermanent loss effect. Basically, what we're saying is that we are giving you a protection from the impermanent loss part, and whatever fees are being accumulated on top of that, that's what you're actually receiving as a whole.
And in that scenario where it's a very small possibility, but when you liquidate, everything is there, and then because the pool is providing the BNT and they have the pool token, then they will have additional TKN tokens that will not be used at all. Would that be a scenario where that happens?
Can you repeat that? You were breaking off for a second to me.
Sorry. So in the scenario of this very small possibility where when you liquidate, it is whatever that you put in at day 1. So day 100 is exactly whatever you put in day 1. So when you liquidate, you just get everything that you had in the first place. During this 100 days, because the BNT is provided by the protocol, the BNT also has a pool token, and the pool token generates BNT and TKN. in this scenario, the additional TKN will not be, the additional TKN from the protocol's pool token will not be used to subsidize the individual that is liquidating TKN. So what will happen to this additional TKN that is accumulated by the pool token of the protocol?
So it's exactly as before. It's the same thing. Like any other scenario that removing or unstaking your position is, the protocol measure and checks how much TKN you're entitled to receive, and that's the amount that we are that's the amount that you'll be receiving in value, overall value. So if there's no impermanent loss, basically you'll receive like the fees that were accumulated on top of that. If there is impermanent loss, you'll receive like the protection plus the fees.
So if there's no impermanent loss, then this additional TKN fees that is owned by the protocol's pool token, where does it go?
If no one staked BNT against your TKN position?
Yeah.
So basically you'll receive the TKN portion, and whatever BNT side will be burnt.
So the TKN will be burned.
Okay, I got it.
It's exactly, as I say, it's exactly the same scenario as we've discussed.
Yeah.
If the protocol holds pool token, then the protocol will try to burn as much, like liquidate as much pool tokens as needed in order to give you as much. There is one scenario that we did not cover here, and that's like, maybe that's the one scenario we're trying to go for, is that there is a possibility that after, let's say you come in with 100, the protocol mints 100, and I know we have like 5 minutes to go, so I'll be like, I try to get quickly through this. Fees are being accumulated, you withdraw your position, but there is an excess of TKN, overall TKN in the pool. So instead of burning all the pool tokens or liquidating all the pool tokens, the protocol might only liquidate, let's say, 90% of the pool tokens, like your position, and whatever the position that the protocol is holding, but not the entire thing, because it will only liquidate the amount that is needed in order to give you the amount of TKN that your stake holds. And as a result of that, there might be a situation where the protocol is actually holding pool tokens and can be even like remotely potential the only liquidity provider in a pool. Until someone comes in with BNT or with TKN, and then the whole scenario starts over from scratch.
Why would anyone come in with BNT? Because the protocol can't provide the other side.
Yeah, but if
but to replace the BNT that's.
If the protocol holds pool tokens, then anyone who's coming with BNT can come in and replace that position. And if the protocol holds pool tokens, anyone can come in with TKN, and then when they remove their liquidity, the available pool tokens can be used in order to cover their position.
Okay, got it.
But Lisa, it's important also to understand that there may be a point where a BNT liquidity provider cannot provide liquidity to the pool because you need to have TKN on the other side in order to provide BNT liquidity. And as you provide this TKN liquidity, it opens up space in the pool to provide BNT liquidity.
So BNT providers, they can only start providing liquidity if there is BNT provided by protocol. So to only replace the BNT that's provided by protocol.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, so I know we're running out of time. Just a quick one.
Well, is it, Asaf, you have to jump into something else, or
I actually do have to jump, but I think we covered a lot of different things. If you have any additional questions, like let's see if this syncs. Let it sync for a second. Let's see if you have any other questions, and then we can schedule another call for tomorrow if needed, or if you can send the list of questions or things that are not clear, and then we can address them in more elaborate scenarios. If you want to dive in deeper into the finance stuff and the calculation stuff, we can maybe bring in one of the financial advisors that we've been working with. like that's what I'm saying. Like I think we have covered most of it. And now it's time to understand what is the best approach of moving forward.
Yes.
If we need like what heavy gun to bring into the next level.
Yeah, and Lisa, I can stay on just to kind of like talk through anything and sort of next steps. So cool.
Okay.
So Asaf, if you want to jump, feel free.
Thank you, Lisa. It was
Thank
a
you,
pleasure.
Asaf.
And if you have any questions, feel free.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, no worries. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye. So,
Go ahead.
So what do you have in mind and what do you want to cover?
This idea, I think what's really new here is no one has ever thought about a protocol co-investing alongside liquidity providers. And so I think that's the real dynamic that's kind of new to AMMs and new to users, is that the Bancor protocol supported by BNT holders are effectively taking on both the risk and the reward. The risk being the impermanent loss, and the reward being the fees that are generated by the by swaps and by the protocol's co-investment. So I think even just nailing those mechanics, I think would be awesome. Yeah. There's also considering sort of the liquidity provider's experience, which is that you are accruing impermanent loss insurance. So it's effectively the longer you stay in the pool, the more insurance you are being provided. And there's this idea that the current settings are that if you stay in the pool there's a cliff, and if you stay in the pool for 30 days, then you receive 30% coverage of any impermanent loss you might experience. And then the insurance increases by 1% each day, so that once you get to, let's say 40 days, that's 40% insurance, 50, that's 50, and then 100 days is when you get full protection from any impermanent loss. And any time thereafter, so in perpetuity, you are owed back by the protocol 100% of your initial stake plus fees. And this is kind of like, what's interesting about it, it's sort of like a new type of yield farming, or a new type of liquidity mining. Whereas before, it's like LPs were just getting paid this sort of linear amount, right? Where this amount is being dropped on this pool over this period of time. If you're in the pool and you own this percentage, this is how much you'll get. And that was sort of like a blunt instrument in providing liquidity mining rewards. And this is compensating for exactly the amount of impermanent loss that you might experience. So it's sort of making liquidity provision more deterministic. Whereas before I was like, okay, as a liquidity provider, my hope is that the amount of liquidity mining that I generate will cover the impermanent loss that I will experience. And that's really the bet that most LPs make on AMMs today. I'll get enough liquidity yield farming rewards to cover my impermanent loss. And this proposition is saying, we will always pay you the exact amount of impermanent loss you will suffer. And it's programmatic as determined by the protocol. And this is the sort of value proposition that we're trying to introduce to AMMs, to make them sort of more deterministic and predictable, such that you're not in a situation where you're like, oh, well, I earned this much of this yield farming token, but I lost this much in impermanent loss, and so I'm actually at a net loss. Whereas before, I came into this yield farm seeing like 100% APY. How could this possibly happen? And so it really makes the sort of like returns, I guess, more predictable. Now, the real challenge for us is we need to generate enough revenue in the system. The protocol needs to generate enough revenue off its co-investments to cut to ensure that there will not be too much inflation that will really affect the price of BNT. And there's a couple graphs in particular in the economic analysis where we started to model out how we are projecting the revenues to exceed the cost of protection. And I'm going to send you these graphs because they're pretty interesting.
It's the one after 0.25 months, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm sending it here just in case. But it's important to note that the impermanent loss payouts, they're not happening unless a liquidity provider withdraws, right? So say someone is in a pool and there's some impermanent loss on their stake. The protocol isn't minting immediately to cover that loss. They're only minting when the liquidity provider withdraws from the pool. So that's just kind of something.
So by that logic, because when the protocol is the one putting BNT in there, the protocol will not withdraw BNT. It will either be burnt or not withdraw. So in that case, the protocol's BNT will never experience impermanent loss. Could you say that? Okay.
Protocol's BNT will never experience impermanent loss.
Because if it does experience impermanent loss, then I'll be curious to understand how would that loss be distributed to existing BNT holders.
Could the protocol? I suppose the protocol would just have less revenue to pay out to liquidity providers when they withdraw, right? So if the protocol's BNT didn't generate enough fees to cover for their impermanent loss, then like you can think of their fees adding to this sort of network balance of BNT that's being used to pay out impermanent loss insurance. And so if the protocol didn't generate enough fees on their BNT, then they would have less BNT to pay out impermanent loss insurance, in which case the protocol would have to mint more BNT to pay out its liabilities. And this additional minting could put downward price pressure on BNT. Does that make sense?
So then you're saying, by that logic, BNT, the BNT that's minted by the protocol could experience impermanent loss, but because the system can be minting BNT anyway, so it will net out its effect. But there could be long-term effects because that increases the supply of BNT, which reduces the value of each BNT that's out in space.
Yeah, I'm essentially saying that the protocol would have less money to pay out, would have less excess BNT to pay out impermanent loss insurance, and would therefore require more BNT to be minted in order to pay it out. And that additional minting could cause downward price pressure.
Okay, so
you can sort of think of the protocol having this sort of like imaginary treasury that it can use to pay out LPs impermanent loss insurance. And each time the protocol generates revenue from its BNT, it adds to that protocol treasury that it has available to pay out insurance loss. And each time there's not available BNT or there's not available fees to pay out that loss, they're having to generate new BNT, which is increasing inflation. Okay. So the key is to always have a protocol treasury that or a balance of BNT that is net positive to cover the impermanent loss liabilities to pay out LPs. And also, I guess on a high level, you could sort of think about what we've done. Does that make sense, or did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like impermanent loss by all the existing BNT holders, because if this BNT is not used in, like the protocol is not minting BNT and BNT is just not minted, then this loss wouldn't happen, as in the potential loss of a downward pressure in price. But it's probably not called impermanent loss. It's probably called another name, but it is still a loss or it's still a risk. It's still an opportunity cost that now can be quantified.
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate.
Okay, yeah, just wanted to clarify.
When the protocol's co-investment is not profitable, it has less money to cover its liabilities.
Yep.
Its liabilities being the impermanent loss insurance. So in a way, you could say that the risk of BNT, the risk of impermanent loss in the system has been shifted onto BNT holders.
Yep.
So there's no risk for liquidity providers in the system, but there is risk to BNT holders. And that is sort of the power of the protocol, is that it can now take on this risk and can also generate rewards that we expect and hope will exceed the risk.
Yep.
And also, just like any staking rewards model, the sort of worst off will be the BNT holders if they just keep their tokens sitting idle in their wallet. The better off will be BNT holders that stake their BNT into a pool and generate fees. And that's sort of by design. That's just like SNX staking rewards or any staking rewards model. It's by design that we want an incentive for BNT holders to support the protocol as an active participant. So to stake their BNT in a pool, this way they will generate fees off of that pool's revenue and be sort of less exposed to controlled inflation. And this is the same with sort of any like SNX is a perfect example that was successful and they put inflation on SNX and that those inflation rewards only went to SNX providers who provided liquidity.
Stakers,
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you answered a lot of my questions. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, I mean it's definitely a lot to digest. Especially it's like some people will be like, oh my God, like inflation, like, this is horrible, but what I guess they don't some people aren't seeing is that it's the protocol is taking risk, but it's also generating a reward. And there are parameters controlled by governance that if we see that the cost of liquidity provision is higher than the revenue being generated by the protocol, and there's too much printing, that governance can adjust the parameters of the insurance. For instance, to not cover 100% of the impermanent loss insurance, or to charge liquidity providers a fee for full insurance. So, there are these mechanisms and in the system that can reduce the cost on the network if we find that the cost is too high.
Okay. Got it. Do you also have like FAQs that people ask so that it can be answered at the same time? Or it can be structured in a way where these FAQs can be answered?
Yeah, so like a document that has like FAQs?
Like just top 3 FAQs people ask?
No, but that's a good idea that to have. We have, I guess, a general list of answers, so we haven't formatted into a document. I think what I've shared what I've just shared with you on Telegram is the sort of initial questions that we've had. Is that around sort of excessive inflation and the sort of mitigation and the answers to that. But yeah, I think we do need some sort of general FAQ. It's just a matter of putting that into a document.
So I was coming from the perspective of what are the general FAQs, and then just structure the answers into the video or into the explanation.
Oh, so sorry, what's your question?
So for example, inflation is something that people care a lot about. So then the video will have a small focus on inflation.
Yeah.
That will be answered. If inflation is something people don't care about, then there will be no further explanation on inflation. It will just be like a casual mention to explain how it works, how it impacts stuff, and then that's it.
Yeah, I think that would make sense as a part. Like potentially there could be a section where, you know, after explaining the mechanics, you could say like, so what happens with the amount of BNT supply? Like why? And, you know, there's first sort of 2 instances you could talk about, and which are structured in the economic considerations that I just sent. One is the supply that is provided or that is minted when a liquidity provider invests TKN, which is price neutral supply because it stays within the liquidity pools. The next type of new BNT that's minted is to cover and pay out when there is impermanent loss. And the answers to that are kind of right here, that it's only paid out to LPs who have stayed in the pool for a certain period of time. It's only paid out to when they withdraw. There's also the limits that can be sort of applied to impermanent loss coverage. There's also the idea that there's a very diverse amount of pools, and this is pretty important in terms of diversification of the risk.
Yeah.
Whereas there will be some pools with less volatility, and that will generate more fees and more available BNT to cover the impermanent loss payouts. Whereas there will be other pools that might have a lot of volatility that might require a lot of BNT to be paid out to cover the insurance. And this sort of diversification where you have some high volatile, some low volatile pools, it's, you know, this sort of, it's the idea of kind of diversifying where some of those, the low volatile pools will create a lot of excess BNT that will cover the impermanent loss incurred by the high volatile pools. And that's why in this initial phase, we've sort of just gone live 5 days ago, we immediately had this solution deployed for, I think there's something like 60 pools in the whitelist. And it's the sort of whitelisting of tokens and pools that qualify for impermanent loss protection is also kind of very important. We haven't really covered that, but governance, it basically votes on when a token can be added to the whitelist and therefore qualify for single asset exposure or IL protection. And it's important that the tokens that are whitelisted isn't a token that poses a high risk, because if a token is extremely volatile or fails, then the liquidity providers who are providing liquidity to that pool are owed a lot of money by the protocol, right? So the protocol is kind of on the hook to pay for the impermanent loss that might be incurred, right? So governance inherently wants tokens that are a little more stable, a little more proven. There isn't a high risk of failing. there isn't a high risk of a massive amount of impermanent loss, because if there is, then they're on the hook to pay that out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And now I'm thinking, so yeah, there's a lot of tokens in the whitelist. And for someone who wants to maximize their BNT returns, then they do want to allocate, based on all the pools available, they want to allocate their BNT to all the different pools, because the fact is that these pools are whitelisted via a decentralized governance, which is already a huge signal by the people. And insurance is just a way to signal confidence by people or to signal risk. So given that this is a community-wide signaling that these tokens are okay, then me as a BNT holder, I want to diversify my risk, not just via BNT, the protocol diversifying, but I want to diversify that. Then can I do something like, okay, protocol, this is the BNT that I have. Can you help me to allocate to all the different pools that you have, that you've whitelisted?
So we're working on that, and it's kind of like, it's sort of, you can imagine that as like a Y-earn, but specifically for Bancor, right?
Exactly.
And we're working on that with a developer that says, Bancor, just take my BNT and allocate it to the highest APY pools at any given moment and switch it between those pools. I don't want to worry about it. And so that's definitely something we're working on. We're hoping to get out soon. And it's definitely super interesting. It's sort of like yield optimization, yield bouncing.
Exactly, with an insurance, so you reduce your risk.
Right. So and that's also important to know that it's as a BNT liquidity provider, you're also covered, right? So you would never suffer impermanent loss according to based on the current design. Because some people think, oh well, why would I provide just TKN as a liquidity provider, why BNT? And they don't think that you're also covered as sort of a BNT liquidity provider. But the sort of yield optimization is definitely something super interesting that we want to get out pretty fast.
Okay, makes sense. Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. I got to go and jump to another call really soon.
Okay, cool. All right, let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much. Speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.